Welcome to the Hyperpolyglot Activist. Learn languages, make a difference. My name is Dr. Carlos Yebra Lopez, and today I'm joined in London by Martyn Di Maggio, who is an endangered and minoritized languages specialist with a master's degree in language documentation from SOAS and a specialist in a language called Arbëresh. And today we'll be talking about linguistic prejudice and minoritized languages. Martyn, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you.
So what exactly is Arbëresh for people who, like me, are not familiar with it?
Arbëresh is a language spoken in the south of Italy and Sicily by around about 100,000 people. Some people might say 300,000, in between 100,000 and 300,000. It's only spoken in villages, and there are some communities in Palermo and cities nearby to Arbëresh villages. It comes from the Ottoman invasion of the Balkans when some Christian Albanian-speaking, medieval Albanian-speaking people were expelled, went via Morea, which is now the Peloponnese, known as the Peloponnese. And in the late 15th century, quite a lot of people went to what's now Italy, which at the time was the Kingdom of Aragon, and settled. And to this day, they speak a language that is, let's say, descended from those early settlers who spoke Albanian and their Sicilian or local partners and relatives.
Right. So it's very much a minoritized language, although that number of speakers is not bad at all. Between 100 and 300,000 speakers is between 10 and 30 times the number of speakers of Ladino, for instance.
Yeah.
Which is the minoritized language I specialize in. So that's great. And it's not a diasporic language, but rather regional language, right? From
exactly
preserved since the settlement, right? In historical terms. Okay. And what about the grammar and the lexicon? What would be a brief overview of the main grammar and word characteristics in terms of long words, origin of the main terms?
Right. So there is what we say matrix language, which we could say is based on 15th century Albanian with some Tosk Albanian, so the southern variety of Albanian, which has evolved in ways that diverge from the Albanian languages or varieties spoken in the Balkans today. There are some very important differences between Albanian varieties and Arbëresh. And then there is nobody has documented to what extent the Sicilian and local Latin-based loanwords, how many of them there are, but they do function in unique ways. So they take on Arbëresh phonology, which is also distinct from Albanian spoken in the Balkans, and they conjugate according to the Arbëresh grammar. Nowadays, there is what's normal process of code switching, but there is a huge amount of Sicilian vocabulary, which even preserves some features of 15th century Sicilian. So before there were sound changes in Sicilian, the words were borrowed into and incorporated into Arbëresh, and that includes quite a lot of Norman vocabulary, which has disappeared from Sicilian because, as we know, Sicily was a Norman kingdom after the Arab kingdom. Yeah.
Fascinating. So, two things that I'm curious about here. So you spoke about code switching, right, and its occurrence being frequent and even normalized nowadays. And you also spoke of a distinct Arbëresh grammar. So, as you might know, in this channel, we don't believe in code switching, right? From the point of translingualism, right?
Exactly, yeah.
But and at the same time, we profoundly contend that language naming is ultimately political, notwithstanding the fact that there is also mutual intelligibility and lexical variation as objective linguistic criteria, but they ultimately rely on extra linguistic factors. But I think from your description of the language, I gathered that there is a strong case to say that Arbëresh is its own language rather than a dialect of other languages. But at the same time, when you first contacted me apropos this language, something that you place emphasis on was the fact that speakers of this language have experienced prejudice, negative prejudice, right? Could you elaborate a little bit on this, particularly as regards to the idea that Arbëresh is its own language and is a language that deserves respect and dignity like any other one?
Sure. So there are some interesting phenomena going on in terms of attitudes towards the language. Arbëresh speakers are largely very proud of the fact that they have a unique language. They refer to it as Gluchayon or Gluch Arbëreshe, which means the Arbëresh language or our language. And at the same time, you have this kind of, it's got protection under, so-called protection under the Italian law. However, Italian law protects the Albanian language. It's called La Lingua Albanese, which is not specific towards Arbëresh. So there are some people that since it started becoming protected legally, there are people that try to kind of produce materials for schools, for example. It's all very much focused on the school. School. And they produce material that is basically based on purist ideology. So in my findings from my documentation, I've seen that up to 40%, if not more, of the everyday lexicon is based on Sicilian borrowings. But the textbooks that are produced for school completely erase those elements and import Albanian standard Albanianisms. This creates a problem in the attitudes of speakers where they think that their language has to measure up to the roof dialect concept. So although they understand their language to be a language in its own right, when it's compared to standard Albanian, they think that it's lacking or it's missing real Albanian words. And it's also this idea, which probably compares to Ladino in the way that outsiders see it, that it's medieval Albanian, or Ladino speakers speak medieval Spanish, which we know is not true.
Yeah, absolutely, and which never ceases, is an ideology that never ceases to be disseminated. You can see on the BBC just last year, the Jews speak medieval Spanish, and it's just regrettable. And every time we see one of those, we call it for what it is. We call it out and we say, listen, this is a linguistic ideology that stems from blah 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 blah, right?
Yeah,
to be vigilant there. Yeah,
exactly.
So the first part of your answer is very intriguing to me, because you said that, and this is also a theme that recurs in the case of Ladino, that you have a state protection, that you need a state protection or at least recognition as a minoritized language, insofar that may lead to funding, not just the recognition of it, but some actionable paths. But at the same time, you did say that it is not made explicit, that Arbëresh is not mentioned as such. Albanese mentioned. And then, so who makes the assumption that Arbëresh is encompassed under Albanese?
Exactly. Albanian, it just seems to be policymakers, whoever they are, probably in the local university. There are a few people that teach the Albanian language as, and this is also the case in Calabria. So we have it in Palermo. In Calabria, there are two main, the University of Cosenza and the University of Palermo. I have spoken to people, and I have relatives, cousins, etc., that have done some of those courses, and they say that basically they get laughed at. They speak the language that they consider their own language, and then it's kind of taught to them that you need to speak Albanian.
Yes. That's very interesting. That happened historically, right? Also in the case of Ladino speakers will be mocked at. But what is interesting to me is that they will internalize that stigmatization. But from your description of Arbëresh, it seems that people haven't internalized that negative prejudice. On the contrary, they're proud of it. They say it's our language, right? And things like that. Well, why is that so? Because I think the tendency is for speakers to internalize the judgment of the value judgments of other people, right? As you like, Franz Fanon has studied this phenomenon, right? That you end up being colonized by proxy to the extent to which you reproduce to yourself the very ideology imposed by others, right?
Yeah, I mean, I have seen that. I think it's a widespread problem. You know, even though my family are from this community, I was born and grew up in this country, but my family are from there. And I've spoken to people, and I go there and I say, when I was doing my master's, I'm doing research for my master's, and they say, oh, you should go to such and such person because that person speaks better than us. Or such and such person produced a dictionary. That dictionary doesn't have any of the everyday words in it. It just replaces everything with Albanian. And then, so it's kind of this kind of weird situation going on where the people that propose themselves to be the ones who are protecting the language officially, academically, are actually the ones imposing this ideology. And even though people are proud of it, I've interviewed people that say, yes, I'm very proud of my language. I want to keep this language. I don't want to learn Albanian. But they'll say things like d'accordo. Like they'll text me and they'll say d'accordo in these, whatever these are called, parentheses. And I said to somebody once, why are you putting it like this? This is a word that we all use. And it's kind of this marking these words that are not Albanian as somehow foreign elements or something that I shouldn't be using.
From the ideal model, suboptimal.
Yeah.
I mean, in the case of Ladino, for instance, it's become very clear to me that speakers can be ideologically divided in two main groups: autonomists, those who emphasize the uniqueness of the language vis-a-vis any other language. No, this is not like Spanish, and it shouldn't be. It has its own spelling, blah, blah. And assimilationists, those who think that the preservation of the language is in getting closer to whichever major language is close, right? Like in the case of Ladino, it is Spanish, but in the case of Arbëresh, it might be Albanian, right?
Yeah.
You spoke about those who, in the name of the preservation of the language, may be detracting from its uniqueness, right? The assimilationists. What about the autonomists? Do they have a specific institutional weight or voices that are respected in the community of speakers?
I class myself as an autonomist, and I have some ties with some other autonomists. But although they reflect the language that most people speak, there's not much voice. I have spoken at there was the Foundation for Endangered Languages at conference last year. There was quite a lot of Ladino speakers there as well, actually. It was in Tirana, Albania, and I was really. It was really combative, actually. This very notion that I would dare to be an autonomist and suggest that I should, we don't like the word preserve, but what's the word? Not revitalize. Maintain. Language maintenance should be based on an autonomist point of view. I would say mainly Albanian scholars would really kind of shut that down, because there's this idea that there's only one Albanian language, and people quote that to me a lot. There's the Albanian language is its own branch of the Indo-European family,
Right.
So yeah, there is a Sicilian Arbëresh academic person called Vito Matranga, Dr. Vito Matranga. He says that he believes the language is a fuselect. I see a lot of truth in that, and when I read his work a few years ago, it really informed my idea.
What is it?
And that, I missed you. I missed what you said.
Well, you said that he believes that language is that Arbëresh is a fuselect.
Yes.
What is a fuselect for the people that are watching us?
Right. I'm not very good at explaining what a fuselect is, but basically when the structures, borrowings from one of the languages in contact, come with the lexical items come with their grammatical elements, things like prepositions, etc.
Yeah.
So would you say that was the right way to describe it?
Right. So what we mean is that it's not just the mere borrowing of words, but it's deeper than that.
Exactly. So for example, if I want to say, I'm studying at the University of London, for example, which is something that I did say when I was at SOAS. I would say "Iam estudiar," which that is an Arbëresh structure. "Te," which means at, which is also an Arbëresh preposition, and then "l'Università di Londra." Right. So the phonology of Londra is still Arbëresh, but the grammar is borrowed from Italian.
Right. Yeah. That's very interesting, and typically, but not always, the fact that the grammar is also incorporated in the language means that the influence was deeper.
Yes.
And so, for instance, in the case of Ladino, we have grammatical borrowings from Hebrew, but not from, say, Greek. Right. This is reflecting that the correlation with Hebrew was stronger overall than with Greek.
Exactly. Yeah.
And
yeah. Also, if I want to say I'm going to go with my car, for example, I would say "C'avete me la macchina." Whereas if macchina was an Albanian based noun, it would decline with as a subject with n on the end. So you would have to say "C'avete me macchinen." So this is kind of like you import the definite article also from Italian. Or even Sicilian in many cases. Yeah.
And does Arbëresh have its own flag? Because I saw on your YouTube channel, everybody go to Arbëresh TV on YouTube and subscribe to an otherwise very successful already YouTube channel. And I saw that you have a flag, and then you have the bicephalous eagle, right? Which is also present in the flag of Albania. Could you tell us a little bit about how that flag came about and the relationship with the Albanian flag, perhaps?
Yes. So I believe that the Albanian flag, bicephalous eagle, is actually Byzantine in origin, which is also the case with the Montenegrin flag. And some regions of Greece also have that, the eagle. And Arbëresh culture and identity is very much linked to the Byzantine past. There's the vast majority of the community is Byzantine Catholic. So this bicephalous eagle is really to do with that. And then it's actually different. The wings are different from the Albanian one. But there is, I mean, I can't say that we necessarily have a standard flag. You will see a mix of the flag that you see on my channel and the Albanian flag. In the community, people will use both.
Interesting. Not unlike what happens with the language, right? Between the autonomism and the assimilationism.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And actually, when you mentioned autonomism versus assimilationism, I found that interesting because I always use isolationism versus reintegrationism, such as the case with Galician.
Right.
Yeah. Which I think is also an interesting situation.
Yeah. I think it essentially describes the same, but it connotes both categories differently, right? Isolation is typically connoted pejoratively.
Yes.
In bad, whereas autonomy is something good, right? We want to be autonomous.
Yeah.
I think assimilation and reintegration kind of similar. Assimilation is not necessarily bad, although I'm also an autonomist concerning Ladino, so negatively. But then reintegration presupposes previous connection that is still legitimate. So, for instance, we have people in prison, right? We don't have programs for reintegration of those people into society because that's where they belong, right?
Yeah.
So the implication seems to be that.
Exactly. It doesn't really translate very well to the Arbëresh situation because, for example, even the name of the language, Arbëresh, this was the name of the language. Oh, Arbëresh was the name of the language 500 years ago, before the Ottomans. And then in the early 18th century, the name was changed to Shqip. So Albanians are called Shqiptar, and the language is called Shqip. We say Shqip, they say Shqip, which I can't pronounce very well. And so even the identity and the history for the last 500 years is completely different. You know, so the idea that it's reintegration, it's like, are we going back in time? What are we doing? You know?
Yeah. Kind of this similar problem with the label preservation, right? It suggests freezing of the language that it goes against the nature of the language, right?
Yeah.
And perhaps one of the last questions that I wanted to ask you is about the future of the language. What do you think Arbëresh will look like in the following 10, 50, 100 years?
Wow. I haven't seen much difference since I was a child to now. There are people that maybe struggle to find words, and that's where translanguaging comes in. So you look at it as in a positive way. I hope that the Arbëresh community will embrace this notion of translanguaging, and which we haven't really mentioned so far, and also just kind of move away from this idea that, you know, the one nation, one language idea, and, you know, there happens to be a nation state across the sea that speaks a related language, and so therefore we should think of ourselves as part of that nation, which is not the case. So I don't think that in 10, 15, 20 years the language will die. I think that in 20 years it will be what it is today. And hopefully some of these old ways of thinking and these ideologies will also dissipate a little bit, you know.
Hopefully.
In 100 years, who knows? Globalism is a feature. I'm the only one of my cousins that have grown up in this country that can speak the language fluently. So we have the problem that even people move to Palermo, which is literally 20 kilometers away, and, you know, because of the context of everyday life, they don't really use it very often. So there is that kind of, the threat is kind of coming from globalism, really.
Right. But is it still transmitted at home from generation to generation as the first language of people?
Yeah, sure. I mean, one of my cousins has got a 2-year-old daughter, and that's her first language. That's the only language she knows at the moment. And normally it happens that people go to primary school, and then by the time they reach secondary school, so you've got middle school, secondary school, it's probably fair to say that they have a wider knowledge of Italian because of the education system. So the problem is they get 1 hour of not really Arbëresh at school. A hybrid. We call it Arbëresh. So there is that situation, but then there are also situations where, for example, my grandfather, who, I mean, he's here, but you can't really see his face very well. I could maybe bring it closer.
Is it the same that is in the next picture? In the picture on the
this one? No, that's his father, my great grandfather.
They look like each other very much.
Yeah. So that was my grandfather and grandmother, and that's my great grandfather.
Oh wow.
Yeah. But for example, he came to this country in the mid 50s. Him and 5 friends and their wives, and he'd only learnt Italian at school, so he could read and write Italian, but his everyday language was just Arbëresh. And when he was older, he had a stroke. And after that, he couldn't speak Italian anymore. It was just Arbëresh and English.
Oh, wow.
Became a monolingual speaker, you know, basically, let's say. Yeah.
Okay. So for, let's say somebody who's watching and is saying, well, Arbëresh, I would like to learn the language and to follow your discussion of the language. What are the sources that this person can consult?
Well, first of all, my channel that you already mentioned.
I will make sure to mention it in the description of the video. We will include.
Yeah. Learning. There are some phrases. I have a book called Everyday Arbëresh, which I'm I'm in the process of editing that. But you can find it on academia.edu, is it?
Yeah.
So if you type Everyday Arbëresh into Google, you'll find it, and I think it's a free PDF. And yeah, on my channel there, so far I have 3 live. If you go to my channel and click live instead of videos, you will find 3 lessons that I did live with some people. Yeah, and I'm hoping to continue that and try and get some more people interested in that. No, fine.
You mentioned before that in your own findings, as part of your own language documentation of the language, blah blah blah. So, what kind of language documentation are you carrying out? Are you doing interviews or field work or?
Yeah, I've done field work for my masters. At the moment, I'm looking at some research into attitudes versus intelligibility, which is really kind of trying to see. Look at the standardization proposals and find out what people's attitudes are to them and what's the level of intelligibility. And hopefully that will provide some information for policymakers to say, you know, what should we be documenting, what should we be maintaining? It's an important question.
Yes, absolutely. We always talk about impact in our research proposals, and I think that the connection between language documentation and policy is vital to that impact.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Martyn. It's been a pleasure, and we hope to continue collaborating in the future.
Thank you very much. Thanks.